So, a very good evening to my respected seniors and my dear friends. Today, I, Anuja Parekh, feel very privileged to be a moderator for this virtual CPE meeting. This virtual CPE meeting is on evolving legal aspects and tax considerations on cryptocurrencies. I would like to introduce the speaker of today's session, CA Raghav Bajaj sir. He has an expertise in direct tax and he has got the world transfer pricing rankings. I would also like to introduce Advocate Omkar Sharma, who will be the co-speaker and is a principal associate in direct tax practice. Joining with us will be Ms. Advocate Milind Hasrajani, who's associate in direct tax practice. Thank you. I'll take it further to CA Raghav Bajaj sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Am I audible?
Yeah, perfect. You're audible.
Sure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session on cryptocurrencies, something which has become the talk of the town, the most hotly discussed, debated, and deliberated topic currently. It seems like almost every day there is a big and interesting development in this space. For example, recently El Salvador, the South American country, became the first country in the world to recognize Bitcoin as a legal tender. The number of businesses that have started accepting payments in cryptos is slowly increasing. Recently, there were news reports that the British financial regulator made some observations about social media influencers promoting crypto tokens. Then now talks have started gaining momentum about India's very own official digital currency, which is popularly known as central bank digital currencies or CBDCs. And amidst all this, when people started developing some knowledge about cryptos, we now have a new menace to decode, that is non-fungible tokens or NFTs. The whole debate about its legality, whether cryptocurrencies should be banned or regulated, has also added a lot of fuel to the fire. If we talk about valuations, I'm sure everyone will acknowledge that because of the crypto prices going up and down crazily almost every day, this asset class has become a trader's paradise. But the question is it a bubble or does it have some other uses also? Which industries will be affected by this? Does it have anything of relevance for lawyers, chartered accountants, professionals like us? And why is the underlying technology being regarded as Internet 3.0? So in today's session, what we will do, we will try to decode crypto tokens and venture into areas like what is a cryptocurrency, the evolving legal landscape, are crypto earnings taxable, what is the underlying technology behind cryptos, and who all are investing in cryptocurrencies. Now, during the session, what we will do, we will have some polls coming up on the screen. You'll see that the website menti.com, www.menti.com is to be used. And for every poll, there is a specific code which is written on the screen. So what you have to do, you have to just go to menti.com, www.menti.com, menti.com, type in the code which is appearing on the screen. Do participate in those polls. That will help us in collecting information for further research and also keep the session engaging also. So the first question that is there, which is coming up right on your screen now. Have you ever invested in cryptocurrencies? You have to go to menti.com and you have to use the code 16433801 for this one. I repeat, the code is 16433801. And for subsequent polls also, we'll have different codes which we'll put on the screen for every poll question. So there we have it. One person has voted that they wanted to do, but they did not invest because of lack of clarity. Understood. So as we can see, the number of persons who wanted to invest but did not invest due to lack of clarity is definitely outnumbering the other sections. So, with professional firms beefing up their practice areas in this field, we think that this is an opportune time for us to have, number one, a working knowledge of this concept, and number two, an overview of this ecosystem. It seems like fresh talents, fresh professionals who are coming up are also looking for places which can give them exposure to such fields. Moreover, if we talk about its impact on our practices, because of the underlying blockchain technology on which crypto tokens are developed, concepts like smart contracts are getting accepted more and more by the commercial world. Hence, it becomes all the more important for us. If we talk about background, Bitcoin, the first cryptocurrency, gained traction after the 2008 financial crisis when a person wrote a paper about peer-to-peer electronic transactions. In other words, it challenged the monopoly of banks. This paper stated that if one person wants to transfer money to another person, he should be able to do this transaction directly without there being a need for a common trusted party like a bank. And the question is, why so? Why do you want to remove the banks out of the system? Number one, that's because there is an inherent cost attached to the banking system. And number two, banking system had suffered from many financial failures in the past. An obvious question would be then, how would two persons on such a system or network trust each other? Well, that's where the underlying technology of the system will come into play, which we will discuss in the coming slides. Another aspect where cryptos score above centrally regulated currencies lies in the fact that with paper currency, if central banks and governments keep on printing more and more money, obviously the value of money in our hands would go down. On the other hand, unlike paper currency, whose value lies in the hands of central authorities like banks and governments, the value of a cryptocurrency lies in the hands of its users, just like gold. And this brings us to the question of, why are people willing to pay thousands of dollars for something which cannot even be seen? Well, the answer to that would lie in the basics of economy. Let's take the example of gold. Perhaps it has been the best investment over many decades, but why so? That's because gold has supply constraints. You can't just endlessly mine gold. And the same thing applies for cryptos because they are limited in supply. Now, what started as a phenomenon to just revolutionize the financial system has led to the existence of more than 5,000 cryptocurrencies, and everyone trying to be the next multi-billion-dollar asset. Of course, Bitcoin and Ethereum are the most popular ones, with Bitcoin's value moving from 10,000 USD to 65,000 in less than a year, and then going down to 30,000, and then again moving up to 50,000. Undoubtedly, there is a lot of hype in this arena. In terms of numbers, the market cap of cryptos is more than $2 trillion. That is about 150 lakh crore rupees. To put this into context, this is equal to the market cap of global giants like Apple, Microsoft, Google. This is much more than the combined market cap of top listed companies in India. Only around 10 countries in the world have GDPs higher than this. But does this number have any other significance? So from an income tax perspective, this also provides a huge tax opportunity for countries. Why so? Because if we apply a very basic tax rate of 20%, the global tax opportunity for this asset class comes to about $400 billion. That is about 30 lakh crore rupees. And out of this, India's crypto market can also add around 60,000 crore rupees easily to government's tax kitty. Hence, while we know that from a regulatory perspective, governments and regulators are grappling with major issues regarding the legal roadmap for cryptos, all such policy decisions will need to be tested from the prism of a tax opportunity also. Today, with talks gaining momentum about central bank digital currencies also, this field has become very interesting. I'm sure you would have read news reports that during the second wave of COVID-19, celebrities and famous personalities like Brett Lee and others donated Bitcoins to India's crypto relief fund. In fact, now this field is not just about big numbers which can give multi-time investment returns. Of course, that is one big part of it. If we talk about industrial applications, the underlying blockchain technology has the potential to disrupt many industries and businesses. For example, industries like banking, insurance, financial services are some of the key industries which have already started exploring business case opportunities from this field. In the online music industry, some companies have started developing solutions which will help music creators to provide their music directly to the end customers, thus eliminating the need to pay commission or royalty to the intermediary music label. In the field of private transport, companies have started developing solutions which will allow people to do ride sharing with others without the need for any intermediary cab aggregator platform. And the list goes on and on. In fact, cryptocurrencies like Ethereum are now being regarded not just as an asset class, but as a revolutionary digital infrastructure on which apps and other products are going to be developed in future. For example, when we use the internet today, do we know which transatlantic fiber cable is being used in the world? Or let me ask differently, do we even care about that? No, right? We just use the technology. What stakeholders of these cryptocurrencies are saying is that in future, we will be using products and apps that will be based on this technology, and perhaps we won't even be aware of that. Now, that's the beauty of fintech. With this, we move to our next poll, and this is an interesting section on who are the cryptocurrency owners in the world. So again, you have to go to www.menti.com, type in this code 5993781. And the question is, which country tops the crypto ownership list in terms of their percentage of total population? And the options are there on your screen: US, UK, India, France, Nigeria, Germany. You have to go to menti.com and you have to use this code. So as we see, the first vote has come in favor of UK. Then there is votes coming in for Nigeria, US, Germany. So it's sort of a equal division between US, UK, Nigeria, and Germany. Let's see if there is some other votes come for other countries, or if we do have a majority, if we can get a majority for this poll. Right now it's US, UK, Nigeria, and Germany with equal votes. No, I think so. This is what we have. US people have voted for US, UK, Nigeria, and Germany. Now, in terms of ownership trends, first and the foremost point to note is that in the past year, the global cryptocurrency adoption rate grew by over 800%, and that is a big jump by any standards. In terms of percentage of total population, surprisingly, it is not US, UK, India, China, Germany, France, Japan, which tops the charts. The list toppers are countries like Nigeria, Vietnam, Philippines, and there are different reasons why some countries are faster in crypto adoption than others. For instance, some countries are faster in crypto adoption because currently they are too dependent on some foreign currency. So moving to crypto will make them independent. Some countries are faster in crypto adoption because majority of the residents go abroad for work, and when they remit money back to their home jurisdiction, a significant portion is lost on account of remittance charges. Then there are some countries who are facing a crumbling economy, and hence to save an economic collapse, they are more open to crypto adoption. And then there are some countries who are more open to experiment with newer developed methods of payment systems, and hence not very averse to crypto tokens. The next question is, what about in terms of absolute numbers? Well, as you can see on the screen, undoubtedly in this category, India tops the charts. And this is where in the past few years, India's biggest problem, that is the ever exploding population bubble, has started becoming its biggest asset. Let's see in terms of India trends. The next poll is, which Indian cities have higher growth rates in terms of new user signups on crypto platforms, whether metro cities or non-metro cities? Again, you have to go to menti.com, and the poll code for this is 93699688. So which cities do you think have a higher growth rate in terms of user signups on crypto platforms? Right now, what we are seeing is that non-metro cities are, at least the voting pattern shows that non-metro cities are outnumbering the metro cities. And that's a clear advantage in favor of non-metro cities. So that's right. In terms of city-wise demographics, the growth rate in non-metros has surged in the past 12 months. Crypto platforms have reported excellent growth rates in terms of new user signups from non-metro cities. Now, one wonders what the reason for this could be. Well, a recent article, stated that in non-metro cities, the urge to have passive income sources is much more than metro cities. Now, I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but that study had come in. And many people consider this investment class to appreciate significantly in future, leading to a good passive income source for times to come. In terms of age, understandably, the younger population outnumbers the elderly colleagues. Data shows that the majority participation comes from 25 to 40-year-olds. In terms of gender, the data is skewed in favor of males, but the growth rate in female users is also impressive. Now, since the concept of cryptocurrencies is relatively new to the world, there are bound to be some interesting facts. On the screen, what we have done, we have put some points. At least one of them is false. I repeat, at least one of these events is false. Again, what you have to do, you have to go to menti.com, www.menti.com, and the code for this one is 574359994. And as you'll see, this is an interesting section of, collection of events. Where it could be the Tesla's Bitcoin point, Lionel Messi's crypto fees point, Ireland's electricity consumption, whether A person donated $1 billion to India's crypto relief fund, whether two pizzas were purchased for $10, whether crypto gains are taxable. So this is a very interesting event, and we'll know that why this question is very interesting. Right now, what we can see that there are equal number of votes for the Pizza Point and Vitalik Buterin's donation to India. Okay, now we have, okay, the poll is swinging at least. So, okay, right now the audience is thinking the correct answer should be at least between Vitalik Buterin to Pizza Point or the crypto gains are taxable. I repeat, one of them is what we are voting for is the false event. That which of these events is false. So surprisingly, the false one is the Pizza Point. But you know, the interesting thing is the incorrectness is not that this sort of a transaction never happened. So in 2010, a person used actually 10,000 Bitcoins to purchase two pizzas. The value of those 10,000 Bitcoins would have been around 500 million USD. And I think that's why people say that, you know, junk food is not good for health, not just financial, not just physical health, but also not good for financial health. Now, another interesting aspect is that the term that we have been using to denote this asset class, cryptocurrencies, well, that's not the most appropriate one. On the screen, we have put a diagram from a report by OECD. This diagram shows the evolution in the terminology which has been used by various governments and regulators in their official publications and statements to refer to this asset class. So if you see, initially Bitcoin and cryptocurrency were used interchangeably, just like the word Xerox is used for photocopying or the word Jeep is used for some SUVs generally. In fact, in the earlier years, more than 50% official publications used the term Bitcoin only. But later on, as awareness about this ecosystem increased, governments and regulators realized that Bitcoin is just one type of crypto token. Hence, they started using the expression virtual currency. And as can be seen, the expression virtual currency, you know, it increased from being used in 40% official publications in 2013 to nearly 80% in 2016. Today, of course, while there are other expressions also like virtual asset, crypto asset, digital currency, but the general consensus is that virtual currency is the more widely used expression. One more point to note is that Bitcoin rose, even though Bitcoin rose to prominence from 2008, 2009, you'll note that it is only around 2013-14 when governments and regulators started issuing official statements and publications in this relation. And that's why the timeline in the diagram starts from 2013-14. Now, with this background, I think now we should understand what exactly are the apprehensions or concerns of regulators in relation to cryptos, and why do people still like this asset class? Because I'm sure everyone would be reading, you know, on news apps, newspapers every day that regulators are having some or the other sort of concern or apprehension in relation to cryptos, but still the market cap is rising. So what is this dichotomy? So from the regulator's perspective, the first and the foremost apprehension comes from the fact that crypto valuations are highly volatile. What this means is that if one crypto token is worth 100 when you sleep, it may reduce to 80 also when you wake up. And that is one major concern if one were to characterize these tokens as currency. Of course, because the value of a currency cannot go for a toss like this. Secondly, since these tokens are not issued by a government or regulator, they seem to venture into areas which are earmarked for central agencies. The third concern is about potential usage in illicit activities, especially because cryptos were used in the initial years for, you know, some illicit activities also. Then we have the environmental impact issue. In fact, you'll be surprised to note that cryptocurrency mining consumes enormous amounts of electricity. Hence, from that perspective, also regulators and governments have their own concerns. Recently, Iran banned cryptocurrency mining during summer months because of the enormous electricity consumption. If we talk from investors' perspective, definitely. The possibility of massive returns on investment is perhaps the biggest reason why a common man would want to enter into this arena. The COVID-induced hunger for alternative investments also gave a big push to cryptos. And that's why it is being regarded as digital gold, because just like gold is limited in supply, so are crypto tokens. From a more use case perspective, very interestingly, stakeholders are saying that, you know, cryptos can make microtransactions possible. Now, what do I mean by this? This means that activities like viewing web pages on internet can be monetized for as low as 1 paisa per page. While this is possible in current setup also, there is no denial for that. But the transaction costs involved make it unfeasible. And then perhaps the biggest counter, and I think this is the most important one by crypto stakeholders, is that if the regulators and the governments have any apprehension or concern, they should just regulate it and not ban it. Let me give you an example. We know that when vehicles move on roads, accidents are inevitable. But does it mean that you ban road traffic? No, rather you regulate it by putting speed controls, safety protocols. With net banking, we know that with more and more people coming into the net banking system, online frauds are bound to happen. But does it mean that you ban net banking? No, you regulate it by putting 2-3 level authentication, OTPs, safety systems, etc. And I think that's the moot question to be answered here. Do you ban it, or can you achieve the same objective by just regulating it? One hopes that soon this love-hate relationship between the government, regulators, and investors reaches a logical conclusion soon. But all those things are for times to come. Uh, in fact, characterization of cryptocurrencies is one of the most burning questions. This is where the regulators and governments across different jurisdictions are having a tough time to recognize this asset class. How do you characterize cryptocurrencies? So that's why the next poll that we have on your screen is, what do you think is the most appropriate characterization of crypto tokens? Again, you have to go to menti.com and the code is 5783600. As we can see, the first vote has come, in fact, for intangible assets. But let's see whether any person wants. So, okay, we have a vote for money or currency also. Let's see whether there is anyone for security goods, or whether the number of people increase for. So again, okay. So now we have sort of a split view. Of course, money currency is larger in number, but there are people who think that security or intangible asset also. So let me tell you, this the question is whether it is an asset or a means of payment or currency. And this determination is significant not only from a regulatory perspective, but from tax perspective also. And that we'll see in the coming slides. The most common approach, even though it seems that it is indeed an asset, the next obvious question is what type of asset? Intangible, good, security, commodity. The OECD report that we mentioned earlier, it notes that while majority countries consider them as intangible assets, there are some countries who consider them as foreign fiat currency, financial assets, commodities also. When it comes to accounting treatment, even though there is no formal guidance available, the International Financial Reporting Interpretations Committee, that is IFRIC, it notes that virtual currencies meet the definition of intangible asset under applicable IFRS. And this is very important because, as I'm sure that people would be knowing, that MCA has also come up with a requirement that companies have to disclose their cryptocurrency dealings. I think this will be interesting to interpret that how the companies reported in their financial statements. Now, whether crypto tokens are currency or money is still not free from doubt. And I'll tell you why. This is because the currency needs to have some basic attributes. Number one, it should be a unit of account. What do I mean by this? It should be a standard unit of measurement in which the value of goods and services can be measured. In other words, currency is something in which the value of other goods and services can be denominated. For example, if you see any Indian company's financial statements, you will note that they are drawn up in INR. Similarly, if you see a laptop, it may be worth 1 lakh rupees. A phone may be worth 1 lakh rupees. But the point is, currency is something in which you can measure the value of other goods and services. Second is, it should be a store of value. That means that currency is something in which value can be stored. For example, if you work at an organization and receive 100 rupees as remuneration, it means that those 100 rupees act as the store of your value. Other examples could be investments like gold, real estate, stocks. Number three will be that it should be a means of exchange. Very important, because currency is an intermediary instrument or system which is regarded as a lubricant, which is used to facilitate the sale, purchase, trade between goods, trade of goods between parties. And fourth, very importantly, it should be recognized as a legal tender. So today, what is happening when someone is investing in a cryptocurrency? What that person is basically doing is, it is using that asset as a store of value. Interestingly, there was a Supreme Court judgment last year, which we'll discuss in the coming slides also. Now, what happened in that judgment, even though the RBI and crypto platforms took a similar stand, that cryptocurrencies are neither currency nor money, the Honorable Supreme Court concluded that it cannot be said that cryptos are just goods or commodities, and that it can never be regarded as real money. Now, this was an interesting observation, and we'll deal with the Supreme Court judgment specifically in the legal section. So it will be interesting, and I'm sure people know that there is a report suggesting that there is a bill which is likely to be tabled in the winter session of Parliament. So it will be interesting to wait what the fine print of the crypto bill has in store for us in terms of characterization of crypto tokens. Now, with this sort of a background about crypto, why they are in hype, why the love-hate relationship between the regulators and investors, what is the correct terminology after all these interesting aspects, interesting polls. Now I'll request my colleague Onkar to talk about some intricate aspects in relation to cryptos, about their characterizations, and take a deep dive analysis into this whole field, taking into account different regulations and laws. Onkar, over to you. Onkar, you're on mute.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you, Raghav. Thank you, Raghav, for such an insightful view of cryptocurrencies. I'm sure it would have cleared a lot of doubts and rumors surrounding cryptocurrencies, which people may have. So now, good afternoon to all our attendees. Now, in this segment of webinar, I shall make an attempt to lay down the regulatory framework pertaining to cryptocurrencies and would specifically deal with the characterization of cryptocurrencies. After once I do that, then I will also touch upon the interface between cryptocurrency and FEMA. Now, when we talk about characterization of cryptocurrency, the first thing which comes to our mind, as rightly pointed out by Raghav, is whether it is a legal tender or not, or how is it purviewed under various acts. Now, when we talk about crypto, then we call it cryptocurrencies. So whether it is a currency or not, for that, we need to refer to Section 2H of the Foreign Exchange Management Act, which defines currencies to include all currency notes, postal orders, money orders, checks, drafts, traveler's check, letters of credit, bills of exchange, and promissory notes, credit cards, or such similar instruments as may be notified by the Reserve Bank of India. Now, important thing to note here is that it also includes such instruments as notified by the Reserve Bank of India. So the question is whether the Reserve Bank of India has notified it as a legal tender or not, or as a currency or not. So the Reserve Bank has not notified it as such. Now, what we are left with is the other terminologies used in this definition. Now, if we closely observe this terminology, then cryptocurrency does not fall in either of these terminologies. Therefore, cryptocurrency may not qualify as a currency as defined under the Foreign Exchange Management Act. Now, when currency is ruled out, then we come to the next nomenclature, which is coin, such as Bitcoin, which made cryptocurrencies popular. So now whether it is actually a coin as defined under the Coinage Act or not. Now the term coin is defined under the Coinage Act to mean any coin which is made of any metal or any other material stamped by the central government or any other authority empowered by the central government in this behalf, and which is a legal tender including commemorative coin and Government of India 1 rupee note. Now again, it has to be recognized by the central government, and central government till date has not recognized cryptocurrencies as coin. So therefore again, the term coin is also ruled out. The statutory backing is not there for cryptocurrencies under the Coinage Act. Now, the other form of currency which we generally use in our day-to-day life is notes, a bank note. Now, whether a cryptocurrency can qualify as a bank note. For that, we have to look at Section 22 of the RBI Act. It states that RBI has the exclusive right to issue banknotes in India, which again leads to the conclusion that cryptocurrencies cannot qualify as banknotes, because again, RBI has not issued it. Now, and cannot issue it. Cryptocurrency is something which, we mine, or it's exchanged between two people. So there is no central authority who is issuing these things. So therefore, again, cryptocurrencies won't qualify as banknotes. So these are the three obvious terminologies which comes to our mind when we talk about a legal tender, like money. So obviously, it does not qualify under either of the forms which is provided under FEMA or by RBI. Now let's look at some other terms in the next slide. So now, whether it is a foreign security. Now FEMA uses the terminologies form as foreign security, or whether it is a foreign exchange. Now foreign security, for foreign security, we need to refer to the definition under 2O of FEMA, which says foreign security as any security in form of shares, stocks, bonds, debentures, or any other instrument denominated or expressed in foreign currency, and includes securities expressed in foreign currency, but where redemption or any form of return, such as interest or dividends, is payable in Indian currency. Now, foremost, whether it is a security or not. So let's understand what is the definition of security. Now, section 2ZA of FEMA defines security as shares, stocks, bonds, debentures, government securities as defined under the Public Debt Act. Now, cryptocurrency does not qualify under either of these categories. So definitely it is not a security. Therefore, it cannot qualify as a foreign security. Now, coming to the other term used under FEMA which is foreign exchange. Now, whether it qualifies as a foreign exchange, because we do a lot of online transactions using cryptocurrencies. So suppose if we buy goods or we avail certain services, such as the recent example of Messi, who is being paid in cryptocurrency. So whether this cryptocurrency, suppose if I am located in India and I render certain services, or sell some goods to someone situated outside India. So if I receive cryptocurrency from him, will it qualify as a foreign exchange? So therefore, the definition of foreign exchange. Now, FEMA defines foreign exchange as a currency other than an Indian currency. So there are few views possible here. Now, one view which emerges is that it is not a currency under FEMA because it is not a currency under FEMA, therefore it is also not qualified as a foreign currency and thereby not a foreign exchange. However, there are certain countries who have started recognizing cryptocurrencies as a legal tender, such as El Salvador. Now, whether because of that recognition it would qualify as a foreign exchange, it remains a gray area. FEMA does not provide any guidance on that. So therefore, this is still a gray area. We need certain clarifications from the government on this. Now, coming to, so therefore, under these both, cryptocurrencies cannot be categorized under these two terminologies also. Now, coming to the next terminology, let's refer to some other acts. Now, whether it is a security, so as we just saw, that it won't qualify as a security also because all the nomenclatures which are provided under the definition of securities cannot be said to be pertaining to cryptocurrencies, meaning thereby cryptocurrency is neither a share, it's not a derivative, it's not a unit or instrument issued by any investor like mutual funds, etc. It is not a government security, and it is neither any instrument which has been declared by central government to be security. So therefore it is not a security. Therefore, under all the terminologies used under FEMA, it's very difficult to categorize cryptocurrency under any of those given terminologies. Now, let's move to the next classification. Now, what is the uses of cryptocurrencies? Now, cryptocurrencies are most of the time used as payments for payments of various goods and services. Apart from its uses for developing apps, etc. Why people are buying cryptocurrencies? Because they think that it will have value, it will have some monetary value, and it can also be used to buy various things. Like if you must have heard of say NFTs, etc. So there, if you need to purchase an NFT, maybe those online portals are accepting cryptocurrencies as a payment. Now, therefore, it takes us to the next segment, whether it can be used as a payment system. Now, reference can be made to the Payments and Settlement Systems Act 2007. Section 2(1)(I) defines the term payment system as a system that enables payment to be effected between a payer and a beneficiary involving clearing, payment, or settlement service, or all of them, but does not include a stock exchange, and includes the systems enabling credit card operations, debit card operations, smart card operations, money transfer operations, or similar operations. Now, who regulates this payment system? Again, the RBI is the authority who regulates the issuance of payment system instruments. And accordingly, the RBI has issued a master direction on issuance and operation of prepaid instruments in 2017, wherein prepaid instruments, payment instruments have been defined as payment instruments that facilitate purchase of goods and services, including fund transfers against value stored on such instruments. Now, in respect of when we talk about cryptocurrencies, there is no exact value which is stored in the cryptocurrency. The value is determined on market forces. What is the demand and supply of cryptocurrencies? What we think is the value of that cryptocurrencies. So it is determined by us. And there is no exact value which can be said is stored in that particular cryptocurrency. So today it can be 1 rupee, tomorrow it can be 100 rupees, day after tomorrow it can be 1,000 rupees, like we have seen in Bitcoin. So it does not have a fixed value. So therefore, it is distinguished from prepaid payment instrument. And again, since prepaid instruments are recognized and issued by RBI, and cryptocurrency not being issued by RBI would not qualify as a prepaid instrument. However, there is a second point which differentiates is that there is no exact value which is stored on them, like credit cards. So therefore, legally speaking, cryptocurrencies would not qualify as a prepaid payment instrument under the Payment System Act. Now, since all these categories have been ruled out or fall into the gray area, can we say that cryptocurrencies are goods? Now, in this regard, I will place reliance on the case of Vikas Sales Corporation versus Commissioner of Commercial Taxes, wherein the Supreme Court held that the term property. Now, what is a property? The property includes everything that has an extendable value. It includes the item in question and all rights and liabilities associated with it. An element which is material to the expression is ownership. While property has all interests in it, it is the ownership that lets the owner exercise such interest, where the interest extends to doing everything an owner is capable of doing to exercise his right in the property. So therefore, definitely cryptocurrency has a value and it fits into this definition. So it can be called a property. Now, what is the nature of this property? Is it tangible or intangible? So definitely it is intangible. If you see 2C of the Benami Transactions Act, then it says that property means any kind of property, whether movable or immovable, tangible or intangible, includes any right or interest in such property. So since this is an intangible, it can be called an intangible property. Now, what are goods? So therefore, goods are, so section 2(7). So, okay, prior to this, let's also look at Tata Consultancy Services, wherein the Supreme Court observed that goods can be tangible or intangible. So even if it is an intangible property, it can qualify as goods. What is the test to determine that? The test to determine is whether the concerned item is capable of abstraction, consumption, and use, and whether it can be transmitted, transferred, delivered, stored, possessed. All these things can be done with respect to a cryptocurrency. Therefore, it qualifies as an intangible property. An intangible property qualifies as goods, as has been held by the Supreme Court. Also, let's see the definition of goods under Sales of Goods Act. Now, section 2(7) of the Sale of Goods Act defines the term goods to mean every kind of movable property other than actionable claims and money, and includes stocks and shares, growing crops, grass, and things attached to or forming part of the land which are agreed to be severed before sale or under the contract of sale. Now, section 3, clause 36 of the General Clauses Act defines movable property to mean property of every kind except immovable property. Definitely, cryptocurrency is not an immovable property. We need not even look at the definition. So therefore, it's a movable property, which therefore qualifies as goods under the Sales of Goods Act. Therefore, there is a view that cryptocurrencies would qualify as an intangible property, which is goods. So when we read all the terminology, this may be the best fit for cryptocurrencies, though the treatment will depend upon the act we are referring to. So it's not always the Sales of Goods Act or any other act which would hold relevance, which can be held to be supreme when characterizing or categorizing cryptocurrencies. Therefore, how we want to treat them, under which act we want to treat them, under which statute it is being referred to, that would hold relevance when we characterize cryptocurrencies. So under something, it may get characterized as goods, while it might also get as characterized at a foreign exchange, if there is a clarification by the government. So therefore, there are multiple views possible, and we are not at this point very clear as to what could be the exact category under which cryptocurrencies would fall. Now, moving on to the next slide. How does FEMA, what could be the treatment of? So today, since cryptocurrencies are getting exchanged between countries. So I am locating here, someone must be located outside India, and there is a lot of exchange happening between people all around the world. So therefore, let's see how to characterize cryptocurrencies under FEMA. Now, section 2 clause, moving on to FEMA. Under FEMA, given that cryptocurrencies may get classified as intangible movable property, any purchase or sale between a person resident in India and a person resident outside India would get classified as import and export transactions. So if someone is situated outside India, he is selling cryptocurrency to me. So, I being located in India, it would qualify as import. If I am selling it to someone who is located outside India, it would qualify as export. Now, how are these transactions treated? Now, there are two categories under FEMA under which any transaction gets treated, any import or export transaction get classified. It can either be categorized as a capital account transaction or a current account transaction. When we talk about capital account transaction, it is defined under section 2E, which defines capital account transaction as a transaction which alters the assets or liabilities, including contingent liabilities, outside India of person resident in India, or asset or liabilities in India of person resident outside India, and includes transaction referred to in section 6 clause 3 of FEMA. Now let's take an example. Now, in case of a purchase of a cryptocurrency by the buyer from a person resident outside India, thereby meaning I buy it from a person who is located outside India, the cryptocurrency gets transferred into the wallet of the buyer, and the buyer I will have exclusive rights over such cryptocurrency. Now, in such a case, the location of the asset or the cryptocurrency for all legal purposes will be India, because I am holding it. Therefore, the purchase of cryptocurrency does not alter the asset and liabilities outside India of the buyer. So since I am holding it in India, the situs is India, so any assets which I hold outside India does not get altered. There is no material change to it. Therefore, since it does not alter the assets or liabilities outside India, this purchase would not fall under the category of capital account transaction. Similarly, in case of sale, if I sell it to someone who is located outside India, the foreign person's asset and liabilities which is in India does not get altered. There is no material change. Therefore, again, it would not, even that export would not qualify as a capital account transaction under FEMA. That leaves us with current account transaction. Now, what is a current account transaction? So reference can be made to section 2J of FEMA, which defines current account transaction as a transaction other than a capital account transaction, and includes, the important one is A. So I'm not going through all the other one. The first one is the most important one, which says, and under which we fall. It says payments due in connection with foreign trade, other current business services, and short-term banking and credit facilities in the ordinary course of business. So let's see the categories of transaction which can fall under this current account transaction. Now, what can be the categories of transaction? The first category can be purchase of cryptocurrencies through fiat. So I want to purchase a cryptocurrency from an exchange which is located outside India, or from a person who is located outside India. So I purchase that particular cryptocurrency and I pay him in USD against that. That is the first transaction. Second transaction can be I purchase certain goods or services, I procure certain services from a person who is outside India and I pay him in cryptocurrency.
Playing from the AO Cash
Now-
Money Meter.
What can be the third transaction? So exchange of cryptocurrencies. So I purchase a cryptocurrency and I pay in cryptocurrency. So these can be three categories of transaction which can be effected through cryptocurrencies. So either buying cryptocurrency through fiat, that is the first. The second one is buying goods or services through cryptocurrencies. The third is buying cryptocurrency with another cryptocurrency. Now, any payment which is made or received in connection with the purchase or sales transaction of cryptocurrency by an Indian resident with a person outside India under the all the three categories will be considered as a payment made or received in lieu of foreign trade. So there is a foreign. So therefore, it takes us to the part A of the definition, or clause A of the definition, which says payments due in connection with foreign trade. So therefore, in respect of all the three categories, if I am dealing with a person who is located outside India, so it will qualify as a current account transaction under FEMA. Now, if it qualifies as a current account transaction, then what is the problem with FEMA? The problem with FEMA is that cryptocurrency is not treated as a legal tender. So while I am making some form of a payment by usage of cryptocurrencies against a foreign trade, but is that payment recognized? So as we have seen, it does not fall under foreign exchange, or is it not a currency? It's not. It is not a foreign security. Then whether I can actually make payment by a cryptocurrency, will I fall short of FEMA? Or tomorrow will the government raise any questions with respect to violation of FEMA? So again, this is a gray area. We don't have much clarity on it. Transactions are happening day in and out, but we have not seen, much of an action by the government on this. I have not seen that, multiple show cause notices. Since we are one of the, India is one of the, has the most number of people who holds cryptocurrencies. So definitely transactions are happening day in and out, but still the government is silent on it. Let's see if the bill which is going to be tabled in the winter session will throw some light on this. Now, okay, it is not recognized as legal tender, but since ancient times we have seen that goods getting exchanged against another goods. Now, since we also earlier categorized cryptocurrencies as goods or as an intangible property, so am I exchanging goods against good? Am I doing a barter? So the natural answer would be yes. I'm effecting a transaction of barter. Now, is barter in terms of foreign trade recognized under FEMA? Now we need to refer to the FEMA Exchange Management Manner of Receipt and Payments Regulation 2016, which prescribes for the mode of payment for import transactions. Now, what are the acceptable modes of payment? Is a barter an acceptable mode of payment? May not be. The acceptable mode of payment as per the regulations are: 1, payment made in currency appropriate to the country of shipment of goods, or 2, payment made in foreign exchange through an international card held by him in rupees from international credit card, debit card, or through credit debit card servicing bank in India against the charge slip signed by the importer or as prescribed by RBI from time to time, provided that the transaction is in conformity with the extant provisions, including the foreign trade policy. So again, it is not recognized as a payment system. But the interesting point to note here is that the first one says payment made in currency appropriate to the country of shipment of goods. So if I am sending goods to say El Salvador and they make payment in cryptocurrencies, is that a valid payment? Again, this is a gray area. FEMA does not throw light on this, or we don't know whether it would qualify as a legal tender or not in that case, because it is a currency which is recognized by El Salvador. So again, a lot of gray areas under FEMA. Now, therefore, moving on to the next aspect now, what are the implications of sale of virtual currencies to a person who is resident now? Okay, so the first part was with respect to import, what happens in terms of exports. Now for exports, there are again few recognized payment systems. Now regulation 2.2 provides that for export transaction, receipts shall either be in currency appropriate to the final place of final destination as mentioned in the declaration form, or any other mode as provided for imports also, as is recognized by RBI. So again, this has the same problem as highlighted for imports. So now if I am receiving certain goods or I am sending certain goods to El Salvador, the again same problem will arise, whether that payment made by someone located in El Salvador in cryptocurrencies will be recognized as a legal tender. Again, we don't have any answer. So there is a lot of doubts when we talk about foreign trade, wherein payments are made through cryptocurrencies, whether it is legal, whether it is illegal, whether it would be allowed, not allowed, what regulations would govern, how cryptocurrencies are to be characterized, how under what statute would the sales transactions affected through cryptocurrencies get governed. So a lot of gray areas, a lot of answers which we need. Hopefully the bill which is going to be tabled in the winter session would answer some of these queries. Not only this, I'm also worried about the legality of cryptocurrencies. There was a time when cryptocurrencies got banned by RBI, and then Supreme Court had to intervene and they struck down the circular which was issued by RBI. So still we are not clear whether it is legal or not. So therefore it brings us to the next section, wherein my colleague Raghav would take you through the legal landscape concerning cryptocurrencies. Raghav, over to you.
Thanks, Onkar, for a deep dive analysis. I think the one point which has struck me is that it may be characterized as one asset for one particular statute. It may not qualify as that particular asset for another particular statute. And I think when we talk about global position, the same rule applies. The legal treatment varies across countries. But what is happening, majority countries consider them as legal insofar as they do not prohibit the purchase and sale of crypto assets and their use for purchase of goods and services. Except El Salvador, as you can see, nowhere it has been recognized as a legal tender. Across the countries, what we note is that there are different types of bans or regulations, you can say. So some countries have imposed a general ban. Some countries have banned commercial trading platforms. Then there is a batch of countries who ban the use as means of payment. And then we have some countries which have restrictions on financial sector. Now, let us see the evolution of India's legal stand on cryptocurrencies. I can divide this into three phases. The first phase being the years 2013 to 2017, when India adopted a cautious approach. And this can be seen from RBI's press releases in those years, in which it cautioned the public about cryptocurrencies and highlighted several risks such as fraud, volatility, potential usage in illicit activities, no underlying asset. Then in 2017, the government realized that this is something which is becoming big and it cannot be ignored. So the government constituted an interministerial committee, an IMC, to study various issues pertaining to virtual currencies. And this was a high power committee because this committee consisted of participants from Finance Ministry, Ministry of Electronics and IT, SEBI, RBI. They had representatives from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, CBDT also participating in those meetings. The second phase would be the years 2018 to 2019, when India adopted a rather conservatory approach, or some people like to call it as a crackdown approach. So what happened? Firstly, in 2018, government responded in the parliament that it does not maintain any data on trading or transactions taking place in cryptocurrencies. And this is an important factor which we'll realize in the coming slides, that why the non-maintenance of data is a very important point. Then in the budget speech of 2018, the then finance minister said that the government does not consider cryptocurrencies to be legal tender, and that it will take all measures to eliminate the use of these crypto assets in financing illegitimate activities or as part of the payment system. Then came the famous April 2018 circular by RBI, by which RBI directed all its regulated entities, basically banks, to stop providing any services to or facilitating any entity or person dealing with cryptocurrencies. As a result, what happened with immediate effect, RBI regulated entities could not render banking services like maintaining accounts, registering, trading, settling, clearing, giving loans against virtual tokens, accepting them as collateral, opening accounts of exchanges who are dealing with them, transfer or receipt of money in accounts relating to purchase or sale of virtual currencies. And this was a major setback for the crypto ecosystem in India. Then in 2019, the IMC issued its report, the Interministerial Committee. So what happened in this report? It acknowledged that DLT, that is distributed ledger technology, and the blockchain technology, they have wide applications in the financial sector. But at the same time, it also recommended that all private currencies should be banned in India. And accordingly, a draft bill was also prepared to provide that all cryptocurrencies, except any official digital currency or CBDC issued by the government, all such private cryptocurrencies should be banned and criminalized. It also envisaged the issuance of India's official digital currency by RBI, because enabling provisions are already there in the RBI Act that permit the central government to approve a CBDC which has been recommended by RBI to be a banknote, and thus a legal tender in India. Now, this report was a second major setback for the crypto ecosystem in India. Then the third phase would be the years 2020 and onwards, right? Which saw some important positive developments. So what happened in this? Firstly, in the year 2020, that is last year, the Honorable Supreme Court set aside the 2018 circular. And this was seen as a watershed moment, a very positive moment by the crypto stakeholders in India. So what happened in this? Even though the Supreme Court acknowledged that RBI had the power to regulate cryptocurrencies, it said that the 2018 circular was an arbitrary and disproportionate measure because the RBI did not have any concrete data on whether cryptos had any adverse implications on the entities which are regulated by RBI, that is the banks. So basically what happened, RBI's lack of concrete data to justify the action taken by it proved to be a negative point for them. This led to a lot of speculation and debate that this marks a paradigm shift in India's stand towards cryptocurrencies, and thus was celebrated a lot. We will discuss this judgment in more detail in the next slide. Then earlier this year, 2021, another bill related to cryptocurrency was listed for being introduced in the budget session, but the same got deferred. Then everyone expected that it will be introduced in the monsoon session, but in the index of bills for monsoon session, it did not find any mention. Then you'll remember that earlier in March this year, the Ministry of Corporate Affairs also mandated companies to disclose their dealings in cryptocurrencies or virtual currencies in their balance sheets. Perhaps the government is introducing such requirements to gather data and information about crypto ownerships in India. Then came an interesting development in May earlier this year. So what happened? It was reported that some banks were citing RBI's 2018 prohibitory circular to deny banking services in relation to cryptocurrencies, despite the fact that the circular was set aside by Supreme Court. So RBI jumped into the matter and said that banks cannot cite this circular as the same has been set aside by the Honorable Apex Court. It also said that any dealings in cryptocurrencies should be compliant with KYC norms, anti-money laundering norms, and the provisions of FEMA as well. Once again, the cryptocurrency world celebrated this and interpreted it as a forward-looking step by RBI and sort of a possible green signal by RBI to cryptocurrencies. Then the latest update, the Honorable Finance Minister has stated that cabinet approval is awaited for tabling the draft bill in the winter session of Parliament. And I'm sure people who are interested in this field, they would have been reading news reports because there are talks that this bill will talk about not only the tax aspect, not just the regulatory aspects, but also throw some light on how the taxability has to function in terms of crypto tokens. Because much will depend on the fine print of this bill and how it characterizes virtual currencies. If we talk about the Supreme Court judgment in slight detail, so as I said, this case dealt with petitions. So in this case, petitions were filed by the Internet and Mobile Association of India, some virtual currency exchanges and their shareholders, promoters, to challenge RBI's circular of April 2018. The basic challenge was that the circular restricts the right to carry on trade, occupation, business, which is guaranteed under Article 19(1)(g). Now we discussed that by the impugned circular, RBI directed all regulated entities, that is banks, to stop providing banking services in relation to cryptocurrencies. The main issues that were in challenge were, number one, whether RBI was the right regulator for this field, what was the scope of RBI's powers, etc. That is, whether RBI had the power to issue such a circular. Number two, whether virtual currencies can be characterized as currency or money or legal tender. And number three, whether the action taken by RBI met the test of proportionality for the purpose of Article 19 of Constitution. So firstly, in relation to RBI's powers, the Honorable Court ruled that RBI's powers are very wide, and the RBI is responsible for management of currency, money supply, interest rates, monetary policy, issuance of banknotes. Supreme Court also acknowledged that regardless of whether something falls within the ambit of legal tender or currency or money, anything that has an impact on the economic or monetary system comes under RBI's purview. With respect to characterization, as we discussed earlier, interestingly, even though RBI and crypto platforms took a similar stand that cryptocurrencies are neither currency nor money, the Apex Court concluded that it cannot be said that cryptos are just goods or commodities, and that it can never be regarded as real money. So once again, the floodgates for this whole debate were opened. With respect to the proportionality test, Supreme Court noted that any restriction to the freedom guaranteed under Article 19(1)(g) will need to pass the test of reasonableness and proportionality. Now, what do I mean by this? So anyone who is interested in the constitutional law and the restrictions on freedom which is granted under 19(1)(g), they will know that this means that there are 3-4 tests. So whether the restrictive measure which has been taken is designated for a proper purpose, whether the restrictive measure is rationally connected to the fulfillment for a proper recourse, then whether there was any alternative less invasive measure which could have been taken. And number 4, whether there was a proper correlation between the importance of achieving the aim and importance of limiting the right. So whether there was any correlation, proper relation between these two actions. Considering all these aspects, the Apex Court struck down the circular by concluding that today banking channels have become the lifeline of any business, trade, or profession. Hence, debarring any section of the economy from banking channels is violating of Article 19(1)(g), and that's how this circular got struck down, and India's crypto ecosystem saw a very big positive move because of the Supreme Court judgment. Now, I'm sure that this till now it has been a good learning session so far in terms of the legal and regulatory aspects of characterization of cryptocurrencies, etc. Now we'll take a next step, and I'll request my colleague Milind to give us a walkthrough of the underlying technologies that are involved in the crypto ecosystem. How does mining work? And very interestingly, we'll have we'll try to put some simulations on websites to show you how mining work. After that, we will proceed to the tax implications section. At the outset, let me tell that there is a lot of jargon involved when it comes to crypto technologies. Neither of us is a technical expert. So what we have done, we have made an attempt to explain it by using easy to understand examples. I'm sure this will be an interesting section. Over to you, Milind.
Thank you, Raj, for giving us a deep insight on the legal aspects, and thank you, Omkar, for the characterization aspects. So now that we have understood we have a basic idea of what cryptocurrencies are, let us take a deep dive and understand certain technical aspects of cryptocurrencies as well. So let us start with the features of a cryptocurrency. So as we can see, any definition that we go through which defines cryptocurrency will lay down these 4 common features: that it is a virtual currency, it is a digital representation of value or contractual rights, it can be exchanged and traded electronically, and that it is cryptographically generated on a distributed ledger technology. So now, while most of these features are self-explanatory, let us look at what do we mean by the term cryptography, why is it involved, and how and what is a distributed ledger technology. So to understand, let's start with distributed ledger technology. And to understand what a distributed ledger technology or a DLT is, let us take a very basic example of the current banking system. The current banking system is essentially a centralized setup whereby the central bank governs the entire banking transactions that take place in the banking system and overlooks all the banking transactions. And on the other hand, we have participant banks who report to the central bank with all their transactions that have taken place. So a common or a very significant drawback of this system is that the participant banks will not have access to the transactions that have taken place between other participant banks. So let's take an example. Let's say bank A wants to understand or wants to know what all transactions have taken place between bank B and bank C. And this is because bank A wants to give a loan to bank B and wants to understand whether bank B has the capacity to pay bank A or not. So in such a case, since bank A won't have the access to transactions between bank B or whatever transactions that bank B would have taken with other participant banks, it may lead to a situation where, let's say, some mischievous banks will claim to have or will claim that they have certain amounts of funds when they actually don't even have those funds in the first place. Now, let us take an example of what a distributed ledger setup in a banking system will look like. So in a distributed or in a DLT setup, what essentially will happen is there will be no central bank involved. And instead of that, every participant bank in such a setup will have their own copy of a ledger. And this ledger will contain all the banking transactions that have taken place in the entire banking system. So every bank will have their own copy of ledger, and this will be similar to a ledger that other banks will also have. And these ledgers will have real-time updates of whatever transactions that are taking place in the banking system. So again, going back to our example, Bank A now can look into its distributed ledger and see what all transactions that have happened between Bank B and Bank C. So let's take this example one step further. Bank B now approaches Bank A and claims that it has given 100 rupees to Bank C, and therefore Bank C wants to avail a loan of 50 rupees from Bank A. Now, Bank A can easily look into its distributed ledger and verify whether Bank B and Bank C had a transaction between them whereby Bank B had lent 100 rupees. So this is essentially how a distributed ledger setup will work in a banking setup. To understand with a more simpler example, let us take the analogy of a WhatsApp group chat, wherein every member of the group chat will have their own copy of the chat, which is similar to the distributed ledger in the DLT setup. And every message in the group chat which is being posted by any member gets updated on a real-time basis in each and every member's chat that they have. So a WhatsApp group chat will essentially be similar to how a distributed ledger technology or a distributed ledger works in a banking system. Another example can be the Google Docs example, whereby all the participants who have access to the document will have their own copy of the Google Doc, and any change made by one participant will get reflected into the Google Doc that other participants who have access to the docs have. So simultaneous changes happens as soon as one member makes any change in the Google Doc. So now that we have understood this with simple examples, let us try to put it in terms of a definition. So what a DLT or a distributed ledger technology essentially is that it is a network of participants whereby information or transactions is not being stored on a centralized basis, but is instead being stored in a distributed manner with each and every participant who is a part of the network. And that is why it is called as a distributed ledger technology. Now coming over to the next technological aspect, which is cryptography. And cryptography is, in very simple terms, conversion of plain text into certain alphanumerical representations. And it essentially looks something like this. So as we can see, the cryptographic representation of the number 100 is as there on the screen. Now, the interesting fact over here is that cryptography uses certain algorithms whereby the cryptographic representation that we see over here is very unique to the input, that is the number 100 that we have used for generating this cryptographic representation. So in other words, if I make one single change in the input, let's say I make 100 to 101, the entire cryptographic representation changes, and therefore we have a very different cryptographic representation for the number 101. And what this essentially does is it makes the information being stored in a cryptographic manner tamper-proof. Anyone can, since all cryptographic representations are completely unique to the input, no one can, let's say from cryptographic representation of one input, they can rework the entire cryptographic algorithm, because every input will have its own unique cryptographic representation. So in a DLT setup, there are So in a DLT setup, the concept or the type of cryptography that is used is called as a public key, private key concept. It is essentially similar to how emails and passwords work. So in a DLT setup, every participant will be assigned a public key, which is similar to your email, and every participant will have the private key, which relates to the public key, which is similar to the password. So all the information and transactions that are that take place on this DLT network take place through the public key, and information is being sent on participant's public key, and the participant who has received information on his public key can use the private key to access the information that is being shared. So why is it required? Why is cryptography here in this whole setup? And as Raghav and Omkar has previously mentioned, that cryptography or cryptocurrencies essentially want to take away the concept of a centralized setup, and thereby there is no central authority which has an oversight on all the transactions that are taking place. So obvious question that comes up is, why do we even trust what is being recorded over here? And why will people not? Why can there be no fraudulent information that can be recorded in such a setup? So to answer that, we have the cryptography involved over here. It ensures that it is all the information that is recorded on a DLT setup is recorded on a secured manner, and it ensures that no fraudulent information can be recorded over here. Let us take an example of how cryptography will work, or how a cryptographic banking transaction may look like. So let's take this example whereby Bank A has sent $100 to Bank B. Now, how this will look in a cryptographic representation. So here we can see that the transaction contains three important elements. One is that $100 is being sent from Bank A to Bank B. And the third is that Bank A and Bank B's public key are recorded. So the cryptographic representation of this transaction is generated, and it will be this representation, or let's call it a cryptographic hash. This hash value will be so unique that it only relates to these three information that is being recorded. Now, let's say if someone tampers with this information, with this transaction, and says that instead of $100, it relates to $101. Now, as the cryptographic representation was unique to the digit 100, to the number 100, the transaction gets invalidated. And this is essentially how cryptography may be used in a banking setup or in banking transactions. So now that we have understood what a DLT is and why cryptography is involved, let us understand what is a blockchain technology. As the name suggests, blockchain is nothing but a chain of blocks which is connected cryptographically, and each block will have information, that is transactions that are recorded in that block. So each block will have a number of transactions recorded, and each block will have a cryptographic representation, as we saw previously, and that cryptographic representation, or the hash value, will be unique to the transactions that are recorded in that block. To have a very simple example of what a blockchain is, let us go back to our WhatsApp analogy. And in that WhatsApp analogy, we can say that all the messages that we have received on, let's say, 25th September are clubbed in one block, and that block is named 25. Similarly, all the messages received on 24th September are clubbed in one block, and that block is named as 24. Similarly, we can have 23, 20, 21, and so on. So now what we can essentially say is the messages in that WhatsApp group chat are linked chronologically, and that chronology is essentially the dates, and each block will have the messages that have been received on that date. Similarly, in a blockchain, all the transactions that take place are recorded in blocks, and these blocks are connected cryptographically. That is, each block will have a unique cryptographic hash value through which you can navigate through the entire transactions that have taken place on the blockchain setup. To have one more simple example, let us take a Lego structure. Let us take the example of a Lego structure. All the blocks that are there in between, which have been fixed, if I want to change that block, I will have to break the entire structure. And therefore, if similarly in a blockchain setup, any transaction, if I want to change any information with the transaction which is recorded in one of the previous blocks, I will have to break the entire change, and that is how this works as a tamper-proof mechanism. So let us go one step further and understand how a blockchain technology can apply in a banking setup. So let's say we have block 1 and block 2, and as explained previously, that each block will have certain number of transactions recorded in it, and we will have a cryptographic hash, and this hash value will be unique to the transactions in the block. And every block will be connected cryptographically to the previous block through the hash values. So the hash value, the previous hash value in block 2 represents to previous hash value in block 1. Now let us take an example that bank A in this example is sending $10 to bank B. Now bank B wants to understand whether bank A even has the capacity to send $10. So what it can essentially do is it can navigate into the blockchain records, and it can see that bank A has a public key. It will check whether bank A's public key is there in the previous block, and we can see that bank A is there in the previous block, and that it had received $15 from, let's say, bank B, and therefore bank B can easily verify that bank A has the capacity to send $10 to it. So this is how the blockchain technology may work in the banking setup. Now, the blockchain technology is being regarded as being regarded as one of the 7 revolutionary technologies that will change our day-to-day lives. And as Raghav mentioned earlier in one of the slides, that we will be using applications that run on top of blockchain technology, and we won't even realize that. It is also expected that 10% of the global GDP will be stored on blockchain by 2025. Even Indian government has claimed that it will proactively look to explore how blockchain can be used in their own day-to-day functions. So as professionals, let us understand some of the useful applications of blockchain technology in our day-to-day lives, in the current day-to-day setup. So let's say in the title verification process, all the information with respect to change in ownership of land and properties is recorded on a blockchain setup. So that will easily that will make the title verification process very simpler, as in we can easily navigate through what all changes or what all change in ownership that the property has gone through in the previous years, and this may happen on a click of a button. Another example can be of smart contracts that run on top of blockchain technology. For example, smart rent contracts, wherein the tenant and the landlord would have agreed that if the rent is paid on due date, if the rent is paid on the due date, then the tenant will have, then the door to the apartment cannot be locked by the landlord. That is, the tenant can easily access the door, easily access the apartment. And let's say if the tenant has not paid the rent on the due date, then the door gets automatically locked, and there is nothing that the tenant can do except paying the rent and therefore the door, and to unlock the door thereby. So this is essentially how a smart contract will run on a blockchain. And these are a few examples of how blockchain technology can be used in our current setup. So now that we have understood some of the basic technological aspects, we can now look into the concept of mining of cryptocurrencies. And as the name suggests, that mining is not essentially physical mining of cryptocurrencies. So it essentially relates to generating the hash value that we have been speaking about. So as we can, so let us understand two things. First of all, that every information in a DLT setup or in a blockchain is stored in a cryptographic manner, and that every block which contains transactions has a unique hash value. So now the question arises, how is this entire thing being worked out? How is that hash value being generated? So this is essentially done by participants on that blockchain who deploy computers, and the computers use the cryptographic methods or execute the cryptographic methods and generate that hash value for that block. And this is essentially what called as mining, whereby the transactions in the block are verified through cryptographic methods, and in return of this complicated process that the miners or the participants in that blockchain do, they are rewarded with the cryptocurrencies. So in very simple words, mining essentially refers to certain participants of the network who deploy computers. These computers execute the cryptographic methods, and thereby the information that is being recorded in that blockchain is secured and is authenticated. And to carry out this whole function, the miners or that participants are rewarded with the cryptocurrencies of that network. So as we can see, mining essentially will look something like this, and it requires a lot of significant IT setup, whereby, and since the entire cryptocurrencies has grown over time, and Bitcoin is regarded as one of the most wide payment system networks, the transactions that take place on such a network are huge, and therefore to verify these transactions, you will require a huge computing setup to carry out the mining process, and therefore you will have huge warehouses whereby computers and CPUs and GPUs will be working constantly and executing cryptographic functions to generate the hash value and thereby carry out the mining process. So essentially, this will obviously lead to consumption of electricity, and as Raghav also mentioned earlier, cryptocurrency mining requires a huge amount of electricity consumption. It has been reported that Iceland's household electric consumption was less than the electricity used for mining bitcoins. Iran had also recently put a 4-month ban on mining of cryptocurrencies due to wide power cuts in the country. So although this is a very innovative process, we can see that there are certain drawbacks also, and these are certain things that maybe the regulations and the government will have to factor in as well. So is mining essentially that simple that you have to just put a computer and it will generate the cryptographic value? No, that is not really the case over here. Let us take this following example to understand what essentially happens in mining. So in the current example, if we wanted to find out the missing input for this equation, that is 160 plus dash is equal to 300, we can easily find that out because this is an inverse function whereby I have to just find out the inverse of addition, and by subtracting 160 from 300, I will find out that the missing input was 140. Now, what if I change the equation like to something like this, whereby we don't have the input, but we have the output. So the output is let's say the transactions being recorded in the DLT setup, and we want to have an input which will be a unique cryptographic representation. Now, each cryptographic method will have different algorithms and therefore different requirements for what that cryptographic representation will do. In this present case, it could either be 1 into 1, 2, 3, 4. It could be 1 plus 1, 2, 3, 3. It could be 1. It could be a simple text representation or an alphanumerical representation. So this is essentially what the computer or what the computing power does. It basically figures out what will be the unique cryptographic representation for the desired output that we already have, that is the transactions. So is it again really that simple that we have to just put computers to use and we will have the hash values for that, and therefore we'll be able to mine cryptocurrencies? That is not exactly the case. We can take one more step further and see how mining actually works by looking at this example where we can. So here we can see how if my screen is visible, we can see how any plain text or any information, let's say I type in 100 rupees, and we can therefore get a cryptographic representation of that 100 rupees. So this is how cryptography works. Now, how mining will work is essentially that I will have to, let's say I record an information that I have that 100 rupees is transferred to bank A. Now, what mining essentially does is it executes the cryptographic function, and in this case, it will have to find a unique nonce, that is number only used once, whereby when that number is found out, there will be a very unique cryptographic representation that meets the requirement of the cryptographic algorithm, and that hash value will be unique to the information that is recorded over there. And so if I carry out this function, the computer basically guesses that nonce number. And after that entire exercise is done, it will be able to come up with a hash value, which essentially satisfies certain characteristics and will be unique to the information that is recorded. So the characteristic over here is that it should start with 6 zeros, and it should be unique to the information that is recorded. So this is essentially how mining works. So again, going back to our slides and again going back to our example, is it really that simple that I have to just put a computer on, I can simply deploy a computer and carry out these mining functions and I can therefore get bitcoins or cryptocurrencies? Again, that is not the case. Let us take the example of the mining function or the algorithm, cryptographic hash algorithm that is involved in Bitcoin. And the number of possible guesses that the computer has to make are these many. This is a 78-digit number, and this is the number of possible hash values that an information can have. So this number goes beyond trillions and trillions of possible guesses. And to, let's say, mine 1 Bitcoin a day, I will have to have a computer which can make these many tera hashes or make these many tera guesses in a second. This is 142,000 tera hashes in a second, and tera has 12 zeros. So this is a very huge number. This is a very huge requirement, and therefore we can understand how electricity or how the amount of computing power is used in terms of cryptocurrency mining. Now that we have understood all the technological aspects, I will hand over it back to my colleague Raghav and Onkar to take over the tax implications that come with respect to cryptocurrencies. Over to you, Raghav.
Thank you, Milind, for that wonderful insight. I'm sure that our participants would have at least got a glimpse of how, what are the underlying technologies, be it DLT, that is distributed ledger technology, blockchain, or cryptography, and how does mining actually work. So we did have that small simulation wherein just to showcase what happens actually in mining and what do you have to find out. A missing input, but because of the increase in number of participants on this network, the probability of any person winning gets reduced. Now, does this mean that if you deploy more and more computers, more and more massive computers, CPUs, infrastructure, then does it mean that your probability of mining a token increases? No, that's not the case, because the more number of computers you put into the network, what is happening? You're actually making the network more and more busy, and therefore the probability in fact goes further down. So that's what's happening because of the values of cryptocurrency is moving so high. More and more people are coming into the system, and with more and more people coming into the system and fighting for that same game, obviously the probability of success reduces. But why are people coming into this? Because if one is able to mine one Bitcoin, of course that's gold. That's the point. You have mined gold, and that's the point. And that's the reason why still people come for cryptocurrency mining. Now, when we talk about taxable events, so in the life cycle of cryptocurrency, events can be bifurcated into two broad categories. The first category would be the events which lead to the creation of a cryptocurrency, which can be further subclassified into mining, initial coin offerings, which are sometimes referred to as initial token offerings, and airdrops. Now, we discussed mining in the previous slides. How does mining function? What it entails? What are its pros and cons? ICO, that is initial coin offering, is something like primary infusion. So that is like issuing fresh cryptocurrency in consideration for cash or any other crypto token. Just like a company issues fresh shares, we can take that as an analogy to understand ICO. Of course, when it came about into the public image, there was a lot of hype around this, but then it is not much prevalent now. The third event is the airdrops, which means distributing new cryptocurrency to famous personalities, celebrities, influencers, so that more awareness is created about the new token. The second category of taxable events could be the events which lead to the disposal of cryptocurrency. So this could be in the form of a secondary disposal. You are selling it on an exchange or a platform, or a P2P transfer, you're transferring it directly, or you are using it to buy goods or services. Maybe you want to buy some phone, you want to go to a restaurant, make the payment in a cryptocurrency, or maybe if someone were to give our professional fees in cryptocurrencies, that is the sex. So for the person who is making that payment, this will be like a disposal of crypto token. In many countries, what happens, the tax treatment depends on taxpayer status also. What do I mean by that? So for instance, occasional trades or transactions made in personal gains capacity, like just hobbies, could give rise to capital gains tax liability. And the benefit of that will be that losses will be ring-fenced and can be set off against other capital gains. On the other hand, if someone is doing this trading in a business capacity, it may give rise to business income, meaning thereby that normal business income tax rates will apply and losses are more widely deductible. With respect to property taxes, the OECD report that we spoke earlier notes that cryptocurrencies are likely to be subject to property taxation in countries that levy inheritance tax, wealth tax, or transfer taxes. But the point is that much information is not available, once again, on whether and how these taxes will apply to virtual currencies. Now, when it comes to income tax treatment in India, the first and the foremost point that we have to note is that Indian government has so far not issued any guidance on how the tax treatment for cryptocurrencies will be. Surprisingly, the IMC report, that is the Interministerial Committee report also that we discussed earlier, it had no recommendations on the taxation aspect of cryptocurrencies. There are no separate provisions in Income Tax Act which deal with crypto tokens. Thus, there has always been this debate in India, whether the gains on cryptos will be taxable or not in the first place. If they are to be taxed, then under what head? Should it be business income? Should it be capital gains? Should it be income from other sources? if people who are interested would have read again a news report in today's newspaper, today's news articles, that how do you disclose crypto earnings and crypto dealings in your income tax returns, and you'll see that there are diverse views available on this subject. I'm sure we all know, with professional people with professional background on our today's CP session, we all know that head of income is a very important point, because different charging principles, different valuation rules, computation rules come into picture for each head of income. So house property head has a different mechanism to compute your income. Business property head has a different manner of computing. Capital gains has a different one, and income from other sources has a different one. And income, the tax rates are also different. That's why the head of income is a very important point when someone asks you, how do crypto related earnings be reported in income tax returns? Now, when all these things are happening, of course, the people in parliament also, government is facing questions about how the taxability picture will come into play. So government has, in response to all such questions, the government has taken a consistent stand that depending upon the nature of holding, and that's very important, depending upon the nature of holding, gains arising on transfer of crypto assets are taxable under the provisions of Income Tax Act. But the catch is that when the people ask these questions, they want slightly more in-depth or detailed response from the government. The fact that the government is saying that depending upon the nature of holding, it automatically means that once again the dispute or the litigation of which is the most appropriate head will come into play, whether it is business income, business head, or whether it is capital gains or other sources, because the government has made that statement depending upon the nature of holding, and that's a very wide statement that the government makes. Interestingly, the government has no data on cryptocurrency related earnings of Indians, and hence, in the absence of any scientific data with the government on this aspect, it will be interesting to see, if the government is actually able to issue any official guidance on the tax treatment of crypto tokens, because until you have the data, whether you are able to issue any official guidance is actually a question mark. But until any official guidance or clarification or circular or regulation comes into play, it seems that the tax implications on cryptocurrencies will need to be examined in light of the existing taxation principles, which have evolved over a long period of time. So what we have done now the slide that will come on your screen, we have tried to identify the possible Indian income tax implications for cryptocurrencies depending on the different events. So for instance, when it comes to mining, if the intention of the miner is to undertake it as a business activity, then the same could be taxable as a business income. In other cases, Section 56 implication, that is the residuary category of taxable incomes, the Section 56 implication will need to be assessed. And for this purpose, it will be relevant whether, there will be multiple questions which will be relevant, whether it classifies as money or security. Number two, can you say that a mined token has been received from someone else? Because what is happening, this is getting generated out of the network, but for Section 56 tax, you have to receive it from someone else. Then if it is taxable also, how will you compute it? Whether you will tax it on the basis of fair value of the asset on the date of mining is again a question which needs a very specific answer. When it comes to ICOs, that is initial coin offerings, the most scientific basis would be to test the same taxation principles which are tested in case of primary issuance of shares. 5627B, Section 68. But it seems that the conditions in the existing taxation provisions may not get met, because these are not shares, this is not cash. But as I mentioned earlier, ICOs are not much prevalent now, so maybe this discussion will become academic in times to come. Airdrops, as I said, is something which can be equated with consideration for brand promotion or brand awareness, and hence the same is likely to be taxed as business income for the recipient. Of course, the interesting point will be for the issuer. What will you say, whether this is a deduction which is available while computing the taxable income for the issuer, or whether you will say that this is equivalent to issuance of shares or securities for non-cash consideration. So all those questions will become very relevant when someone will be talking about taxability of airdrop. But these three events are the events which led to the creation. What I think is that the majority people, when they will be faced with issues at the time of filing their ITRs or taking a call on how to pay taxes on this, will be forming part of the secondary sale of crypto tokens, because most of the people have made who would have made investments, they would have, when they sell it, that's a secondary sale. So the tax treatment will depend upon whether this same token was acquired by way of mining or any other way. because the key question in this evaluation will also be business income versus capital gains tax, capital gains classification. So if it's a case of a mined token, if mining is undertaken as a business activity, then the gains on disposal are likely to be classified as business income. And in such a case, what will happen? The costs incurred on mining, that is, electricity costs, network costs, computing costs, all those things should be allowed as a business deduction. Of course, that may not be a very significant portion, but for all that it's worth, that may be allowed as a business deduction. But if the mining is not undertaken as a business activity, of course, that there's a caveat to this. But today, the value is becoming so big, it may be difficult to say that someone is not taking mining as a business activity. But if it is not undertaken as a business activity, the relevant hit would be capital gains. Now, in this case, of course, it may be arguable. There'll be a tug of war between the department and the taxpayer, because taxpayer will want to argue that capital gains tax is not payable because the machinery provisions relating to computing the cost of acquisition are failing. Because how do you compute my cost of acquisition if I have generated a token? I have not purchased it from someone. I've just used. I mean, what is my cost of acquisition? So even if you say that this is capital gains head, because of machinery provisions failing and because of Srinivas Shetty ruling, the machinery provisions are not allowing you to tax the gains. On the other hand, the tax department may want to flip this argument and say that no, your cost of acquisition is easily computable. Your electricity costs, the network cost, as I said, the nature of costs, which I said earlier, computing, etc. They should form your cost of acquisition. So in short, this tug of war between the taxpayers and department is likely to continue. On the other hand, if it's not a mined token that you're selling, like if it's just like you have purchased it from a platform and selling it, again, whether for the business income versus capital gains tax, capital gains head decision, I think the aspects like frequency of transactions, volume of transactions, whether you have a proper infrastructure, whether you have invested by taking loans, etc., or your own money, etc., all those points will be relevant to arrive at a reasonable conclusion on whether the gains on such sale will be capital gains head, business head, or maybe a third argument that it's just a capital receipt, not taxable at all. The second type of events in which you can sort of dispose of your crypto token is exchange for goods or services. What do I mean by this? So for example, if you use a token, a cryptocurrency, to buy a phone, or tomorrow, I mean, let's take another example. As I said earlier, tomorrow, if some client of ours comes to us and pays us fees in cryptocurrency, so what will happen? So I think for the merchant or the service provider, it should not make a difference. The income should be taxable as business income because the manner of payment is by a crypto token, and that should not alter the nature of the underlying transaction. So if it's a sale of phone, it remains a sale of phone. If it's a provision of professional service, it remains a professional service. Just the manner of payment should not change the underlying transaction. But for the purchaser or the recipient, I think the gains which are earned in the value of cryptocurrency, the notional gains, there is a merit in making this argument that those gains should be taxed in the same manner as secondary sale of what we discussed earlier at the time of crystallization. Now, what this could mean, suppose 10 years back, I had bought a crypto token for $7,000, and today it has its value has increased to $20,000. So instead of selling it, I use it to buy a product worth $20,000. So I think the argument, I mean, there'll be strong merit in saying that today the 19,000 gain from 21,000 to 20,000 should be taxed today because the gains are getting crystallized today, and therefore I should pay tax on those 19,000 today. Of course, these are possible implications that we are discussing, but there seems to be merit in this argument. In addition to these income tax considerations, applicability of equalization levy, which is popularly known as Google tax, will also need to be assessed by foreign platforms beforehand. This is because the language of this new provision is very wide, and given that this is a new levy, there is not much interpretational guidance available on this aspect. Similarly, the applicability of the new TDS provision on e-commerce operators may also need to be tested when an Indian resident is selling cryptos on a platform. And the key factor here will be whether crypto tokens fall within the ambit of goods or services or digital products. Notably, as we discussed earlier, that the Sale of Goods Act, goods excludes money. So once again, that whole circle, that what is the characterization, what is the most appropriate answer to the characterization question, will have a bearing on the tax implication also. Because the moment you say something is money, it goes out of the purview of goods. If it goes out of the purview of goods, then under different taxation statutes, there can be different implications. Some may be in favor of the taxpayers, some may be in favor of the tax department, etc. So I think all this is what we're trying to say is that this is becoming an interesting space, and because of these different characterization issues and the interplay between different laws, especially the tax laws, the answer to the characterization question will have to be very specific, because as we said, there are multiple implications or nuances which can happen because of one single answer. Now I'll request my colleague Onkar to throw some light on the GST implications in relation to cryptos. Onkar.
Aspect. Thanks, Raghav, for the income tax description of cryptocurrencies. Now, I will take you into how cryptocurrencies can be treated under GST. Now, there are few terminologies or few exempted items under GST wherein it might get classified. One of them was security and another is actionable claims. Now, security we have already discussed in the previous segment that cryptocurrencies might not qualify as securities. Hence, I would not repeat it again. Now, what is an actionable claim? Now, actionable claim is outside the purview of GST. So, and it is covered by Schedule 3. So, Schedule 3 lists down various items which are outside the purview of GST. Now, it specifies actionable claims other than lottery, betting, and gambling as activities or transactions which shall neither be treated as a supply of goods nor of services, and thus not liable to GST. Now, what is actionable claim? For that, we need to look at its definition under the Transfer of Property Act, more specifically Section 3. It says actionable claims are 1, an enforceable claim to an unsecured debt, and B, an enforceable claim to a beneficial interest in movable property which is not in possession of the claimant. Now, given that cryptocurrencies do not have a centralized issuing authorities which undertakes to repay the value represented by a unit of cryptocurrencies, cryptocurrencies clearly do not fall under the first part. Now, second part, the cryptocurrencies are themselves likely to qualify as movable property, as we had discussed earlier. And such a property is typically in possession in the relevant cryptocurrency wallet or on an exchange, wherever you choose to keep it. So it is in our possession. So therefore, even for the second part, since cryptocurrencies are in our possession, it may not qualify as an actionable claim basis the second part of the definition. Therefore, it is unlikely that cryptocurrencies would qualify as an actionable claim. Now, what would qualify as an actionable claim? Maybe the tokens which you are issued during an ICO, the initial coin offering, which Raghav discussed. Those tokens might qualify, the receipt of those tokens might qualify as an actionable claim. Why I say so is because those tokens represent your right in a cryptocurrency which is held in possession by someone who is issuing an ICO. So till the time you get the cryptocurrency, those represents your right in those property, which is held by someone else. And therefore it might qualify as a actionable claim and not liable to GST. So now, since for cryptocurrency, securities are ruled out, actionable claims are ruled out, these were the two categories under the exempt category or under Schedule 3. So that brings us to the classification of cryptos under GST. Now the question was whether it is a goods or services. As we had discussed earlier, it may qualify as goods. Let's see the definition of goods. Section 2, clause 52 of the CGST Act defines goods to mean every kind of movable property other than money and securities, but includes so and so and so. As we had discussed earlier, what is a movable property? So definitely, as we saw earlier, it qualifies as an intangible property, which is goods. And it says every kind of movable property is goods. So therefore, cryptocurrencies for the purpose of GST may qualify as goods or intangible assets or intangible property. Now, given that it may qualify as goods, let's see if it can be used as a consideration for goods and services, for procurement of goods and services. So therefore, we look at the definition of consideration. We can go to the next slide. Now, consideration has been defined under Section 2, Clause 31 of the CGST Act to include any payment made whether in money or otherwise, in respect of supply of goods or services. Here, it would be necessary to make reference to the definition of term money. Now, it is provided under 2 clause 75 of the CGST Act. It says money means the Indian legal tender or any foreign currency or any instrument recognized by RBI. As we had discussed earlier in the previous segment, it does not qualify as either. So therefore, it does not qualify as money under GST. Then what is the relevance? Now, if you see the definition of consider, it also says or otherwise. Now, does that otherwise include goods? Yes, it can include goods. So an exchange of goods against goods, an exchange of goods against services. So that gets covered by, so you can use one particular good as a consideration to buy another goods or services. So this transaction will become barter. So if so, therefore, any transactions undertaken by way of cryptocurrencies would qualify as a barter transaction. Even if you buy a cryptocurrency by using another cryptocurrency, it will be barter. If you buy goods or services by using cryptocurrency, it will qualify as barter. But only if you buy cryptocurrencies, then you are procuring goods. So it will be treated as supply of goods by payment of fiat currency or USD or INR, whatever it is. So now there are two transactions. If you have to buy something with the help of cryptocurrencies, there will be two transactions. The first transaction will be you buying the cryptocurrency by using fiat. So if you do that, then that will have a normal GST treatment. So GST will be applicable given the what you are doing with that, wherever the transaction is taking place within India, outside India. So given what kind of a transaction it is, GST treatment will depend upon that. Now, if you are doing a barter, then again, if you are using the same cryptocurrency which you used by paying fiat, if you are using that cryptocurrency to purchase goods or services, again there will be a tax. So there will be a dual tax. So this was the problem which was prevalent all over the world. Some countries found solutions, some countries could not. But let's see what are the difficulties when we talk about various transactions undertaken with the help of cryptocurrencies. So the first difficulty is how do you when you buy something using a cryptocurrency and it qualifies as barter, then which leg of that transaction you consider as the supply of goods and which leg you consider as consideration. So basically, who is a supplier and who is a recipient is also a question which is presently not answered. Now coming to the tax treatment of various transactions. So the first transaction is mining. So again, there are two transactions which can there are two transactions for the purpose of GST. The first transaction is when you mine a particular cryptocurrency and then sell it. So if I am mining cryptocurrency, I'm mining a Bitcoin and selling it in the market. So that will be supply of goods. It will have the GST treatment as for any supply of goods. Now, if you have the entire setup and you hire me to mine it, then I'm providing a service of mining. So that transaction will be treated as supply of services and it will have the GST treatment as per the Act. The second is initial coin offering. So this I already discussed. It might qualify as actionable claim. So receipt of tokens during our initial coin offering might not be liable to GST. Then there is airdrop. So airdrop, again, airdrop will be, in an airdrop you get a cryptocurrency. Again, it is a good. So it will be a supply of goods, again liable to GST. So it will have the same treatment as any other supply of goods. Now, if that airdrop is towards, say, advertising services, so you are advertising a particular cryptocurrency for me, or you are saying some nice things over social media for my cryptocurrency, and I pay you in that particular cryptocurrency, then again, it is procurement of service by using that cryptocurrency. It will be a barter. So therefore, the question again will arise, which transaction is to be treated as supply and which transaction is to be treated as consideration. Now, wallet and exchanges. So they provide services for storing the cryptocurrencies. So they may qualify as service providers accordingly. Whatever commission they charge on storing of cryptocurrency, on that GST will be applicable. And now if cryptocurrency is used for exchange for goods or services, so as we discussed earlier, it will have the same GST treatment as per the transaction. Again, that it might have a dual taxation impact, wherein first you will pay taxes for buying the cryptocurrency. Second, on the second leg, when you use those cryptocurrency for buying goods or services, again you will pay a GST. Now this problem, as I had indicated earlier, was prevalent all over the world. So let's see two specific examples of one of the most developed VAT systems in the world. One of the first is Australia. Most of our law is replicated from Australia and European VAT. So we'll see specifically Australia and UK. So in Australia also till 2017, it was very similar to the position which I've discussed above. As per a ruling provided by the Australian Tax Office, using cryptocurrency to pay for goods and services was treated as a barter transaction. GST was to be paid on the value of the cryptocurrencies in Australian dollars at the time of the transaction. And the problem of dual taxation was prevalent. So what Australia did? So what Australia did was that they post 1 July, on 1 July 2017, they issued a guidance note in this regard. And they said that sales and purchase of digital currencies are not subject to GST from 1 July 2017, which means that no GST is payable if you buy a cryptocurrency by using Australian dollar or fiat currency. It is similar to what we call in India as exempt supplies. So they exempted the supply of cryptocurrencies, wherein the consideration was paid in fiat. So that solved the problem of the first taxation. The second, they said that the cryptocurrencies will be treated as payment methods. So if you purchase any goods or services by uses of cryptocurrencies, cryptocurrencies will be taken as a payment mechanism, and therefore you will have to pay. So therefore, they defined that the supply will be supply of the goods and services which you procure, and cryptocurrencies will form the consideration, and accordingly GST will be applicable. So they simplified it in a very simple manner, which presently the Indian law does not. In UK, similar treatment has been given, wherein they have said that VAT is due in the normal way on any goods or services sold in exchange for crypto asset exchange tokens. The value of the supply of goods or services on which VAT is due will be pound sterling value of the exchange tokens at the point of the transaction takes place, meaning thereby that no VAT will be due on the supply of the token itself. Effectively, this position is similar in UK and Australia. However, it is not that in case of India, and we still await clarification from the government on this aspect. With this, I would invite Raghav for his concluding remarks.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think in summary, the key takeaway is that policymakers do need to provide clear guidance for the characterization and tax treatment of virtual currencies. And more importantly, update them frequently, because this is not something which regulation or law, if you make today, this is going to last for say 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. In fact, if you make it today, it may become outdated tomorrow itself. So the real-time updation or frequently updating the the guidelines or regulations is very important. Number two, there should be simplified rules on valuation and on exemption thresholds for small and occasional trades. Because if all these things are not done because of the high volatility, which is just going to get fueled up, many innocent people may lose big chunks of money. If you talk at a domestic India perspective, what we note is that undoubtedly government needs to deal with this issue openly and spell out in black and white its stand on the legality and tax implications associated with crypto tokens. In fact, perhaps time is right for India to make the most of the revolutionary blockchain technology. There are reports that India's digital infrastructure is already robust. Aadhaar sees more than 40 million authentications per day. In one particular month, UPI saw more than 2.8 billion transactions being processed. So the point is that the digital infrastructure, the foundation is already set. whatever being said, I think one thing that does look certain is that virtual currencies are here to stay. And in fact, with more and more new concepts like non-fungible tokens, NFTs coming into play, I don't think one can ignore it anymore. In fact, if it is regulated properly, it can boost the tax revenue substantially. At professional level, I think professionals like us, we should, as I said earlier in the beginning, we need to have at least a working knowledge or basic knowledge of this ecosystem. Developments on the official digital rupee front should also be closely watched, because the government and the RBI is very active on that front. And from investors' perspective, I think anybody who is looking to invest, because this is a question which we are asked many a times, okay, that which crypto token do you think we should invest in? And I think the very simple answer is that if you're investing in something that you should know that, I mean, firstly, that person should have a good knowledge about this field, because they should be aware of what they're getting into, because everyone knows this is a very volatile market. They should know the purpose and the use of the specific crypto token which they are looking to invest, because the stakeholders of this setup say that there is only one Bitcoin out of the more than 5,000 cryptocurrencies. Majority may be just shit coins. So you should know in which token you are investing and whether it has a specific use case. Because until the crypto tokens are regulated, things can go for a toss any day in this field, and one should have the have the stomach to take up any such kind of a loss. So this is all from our side. We thank the CNC Jaipur branch, and we hope that we have been able to deliver some valuable insights and try to decode in this limited time that is available to decode the underlying technologies, the legal implications, the regulatory, the tax implications of cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, for this, I'd like to thank the eminent and distinguished speakers, CA Raghav Bajaj sir, Advocate Omkar Sharma sir, and Advocate Milind Hasrajani sir. You shared some valuable insights on the topic, and I myself delved into the intricacies of that topic. I did not know what were this much technical things that were behind this topic. So thank you, and I had a great experience. We also had a great experience, I'm sure. Yeah, but I would like to ask you a question.
Sure. Go ahead, please.
Would we get the PPT?
Yeah, that we can share. That's not an issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot.